Okay. Hello, my name is Ken Horn. I am an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. I am interviewing Jim Curtis on May 29th, 2008 at the main library. Our camera operator today is Dennis Daly. Also present today is Jim Curtis's wife, Ida Curtis, and we're here to conduct the interview on a World War II veteran. Jim, how about your name again?
Jim Curtis.
And when were you born?
When? February the 10th, 1921.
Okay. What's your current address?
Current address? 5335 Moeller, M-O-E-L-L-E-R Avenue, Norwood, Ohio. It's a suburb of Cincinnati.
Good suburb, right? Okay. I'm interviewing Jim. Okay. The reason I'm the interview for Jim is we were both co-workers in Government and Business Department. That was back in the 70s, Jim, before I went into the branches. Anyhow, what branch of service were you in?
I started out in the field artillery, but later on I was transferred to the infantry.
All right.
When the actions really kind of got going over in Europe, there was a greater need for infantrymen than there was for survey and fire control.
All right. What rank did you achieve?
I came out as a Tech 3, so it was a sergeant, but with three bars, but then with a T on a technical sergeant. Technical, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where did you serve, like basic and overseas and that?
Well, of course, I had my basic training both in ROTC. Well, I had ROTC at Xavier, and I think that's why I was put in the artillery. And it was in what they call survey and fire control at the Fire Direction Center out in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which was sort of the west point of the field artillery, just like Benning is for the infantry. But when when the action picked up overseas, the need became much greater for infantry. And a large number of us, and made a very disgruntled group going over, were transferred en masse to the infantry. And unfortunately, it was kind of a bad thing they did in those days. The threat was if you goofed off in the artillery, well, if you were in my outfit, they'd say, we transfer you down to the firing batteries where most of the coal miners were. But if you really goofed off, you will be sent to the infantry. So a transfer to the infantry was not considered a good deal. I will say this, once I was in combat, my attitude toward the infantry changed 100%. I never felt inferior because I was in the infantry.
Yeah. How'd you get into the military? Drafted, enlisted?
Selective service.
Drafted.
I was selected to serve.
And what was your home at the time? Where did you live when you were drafted?
I was deferred for about a year and a half, and the draft board told me, they said they'd feel, I worked for the Federal Reserve Bank, and the draft board told me we'd feel a lot better giving you this deferment if you were working something more connected with the war effort. So I wound up taking a training course from the Signal Corps. It was given here in Cincinnati. And then after I completed that in about 6 months, they assigned me to the Leland Electric Company in Dayton as a government inspector. That was my job until I was drafted.
Oh, so you're actually drafted out of the Cincinnati board or the Dayton board? Or?
Actually, I was drafted through Dayton because I didn't go through Fort Thomas as most of the people here did. I went through Fort Benjamin Harrison. Oh,
okay.
The induction center.
Do you recall your first days in the military? Like did they bus you or on a train to?
All I can remember, the thing that I really remember is I was standing in those eternally huge chow lines up at Fort Bend. Oh. And cold winds and dark. It was wintertime. I went in about 8th of December, so it was in the middle of winter. And of course, basic, well, it's just anybody that's been there knows how it is. It's just that. Of course, mainly was artillery training on the artillery pieces. But later on, I was in the infantry.
Right. But you're saying Fort Bend, that's Fort Benjamin Harrison up near Indianapolis?
Well, that was the Fort. Then I was, well, from there, when I completed my processing, I was sent down to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. That is, as I say, sort of like the west point of the field artillery.
Right.
I was in what they called the Field Artillery Replacement Training Center. That was where the enlisted men went. And then they put me in survey and fire control.
Oh. And I noticed you said, was it December 8th?
8th of December of 1943, that would have been, yeah.
Ah, okay. But that's December 7th, that was after the second anniversary of Pearl Harbor.
Right near Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
No, it was the 8th.
Yeah. Well, questions like, you were telling me boot camp, but
Yeah.
like, do you remember any of the instructors, or, you know, what you did in boot camp, or?
No, well, the thing I sort of remember, of course, is the firing range and the obstacle course, especially doing the obstacle course at night, especially, and when it was rainy. And I remember one thing, that just before we went over the night obstacle course, a group went through it about a week before that. And what they did, they put live fire over you from machine guns. You
Right.
crawled up toward them and actually among them to get through. Well, they were cross-firing, and I guess they got too ambitious, and a couple of rounds hit in the air right over where a man was crawling, and he was killed. He
Oh, my.
got him in the back. And when we went over, they were firing up almost as high as the ceiling away from us. They were being overly careful.
Oh, yeah.
But that day, I remember that. And of course, they had these landmines going off around, trying to simulate combat situation.
Right. Yeah, I went through that. I remember that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That
you
was
know,
something.
You know it.
Oh, well. Now, you say you were at Fort Sill,
Fort Sill.
and then they turned you into infantry. Did they give you any extra
Well,
training?
no, I didn't
or?
go. Now, pardon me. I did not go directly to the infantry from there. I completed my basic training there in the artillery, and then I was sent down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Fort Bragg, wonderful.
And they put me in a signal outfit too, with communications. But it was then of course, well, I'm trying to get myself oriented here.
Sure.
I think it was, I think I was down there for D-Day, because I remember the captain came down, which was an unusual thing, at 5:30 in the morning. We had reveille, and he gave us a little pep talk about D-Day, and he made the remark, "I know you feel as I do, we wish we were there." I'm not so sure that my attitude was, I'm willing, but not anxious. But anyway, I was there until, I guess things kind of started tightening up, and then I got transferred into the infantry, and that's where it was kind of a crisis for me, because, as I mentioned before, the infantry was sort of used as the stick over your head if you didn't toe the line in the artillery. And I told my mom when I wrote back, I said, when I saw my card scratched out, artillery scratched out, and infantry, I said, I felt it was the next worst thing to a dishonorable discharge.
Oof.
But I assure you that after I was in the infantry, I took the basic in there, and was in combat, I realized that really the infantry is the basic thing for which all the others exist. We're the ones that have to get the ground, and we take the ground and hold it. So my attitude changed completely.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. Well, like, you were at Fort Bragg, and
Yes.
then were you shipped out to overseas then, or how'd that go?
Yes, I was shipped from Fort Bragg. I was shipped to the port of embarkation in Fort Meade, Maryland. And I went over though as a replacement, not as a unit. I was not in a unit. We just went. Every battery and company was levied, decided to supply so many men. It was like the draft board did with the civilians. And then they had to send them in, and then we were sent up there. Then it was assigned when it got overseas. Then I got put in the 63rd Division when I was. And the 63rd Division itself was only moving over in segments. They were moving one regiment. They moved over the 3 infantry regiments. And then they brought their artillery over separate. But the division finally formed in France. And the time on that, it was the 8th of December of the next year, that'd be 1944, I landed at Marseille in France.
Just around the time of the Battle of the Bulge. It might have been a
Well,
little after that.
we felt I think the Bulge was a little later because I think we felt the bump of that.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it, I was sent up, my unit was sent up, and now by this time I was in the 63rd Division. And we went up up the Rhone River. I forget the name of the cities, but we get up to the area near, they call it Sargemines, or Sargemund is the German, in the Saar Basin. And that brought memories because I remember there was a big crisis with Hitler over the Saar Basin back in the early 30s. We went in there and then went online at first on the Rhine River. And then all of a sudden one night we were loaded into the trucks and I think we drove, I don't know how far. They were not our own drivers, they were from the Quartermaster Corps. And it was dark night, icy roads. And later I heard of the reason we made that sudden move far to the left was General Patton's army was sent north to hit the south part of that wedge that came in from the Bulge. Mm-hmm. Patton was used to hit that with his 3rd Army. 7th Army had to pick up the slack where he was. So we were stretched from the Swiss border up to the end of Patton Army. And then I wound up in the area near the Sargemines. Mm-hmm. And that's where I really came in contact with the Maginot and the Siegfried lines as they went through there.
Might I ask, you were assigned, you went to the replacement depot and they gave you to the 63rd. What unit in the 63rd did you serve with? What regiment, or company, or battalion?
Well, I was put in machine guns, Company D, 250. Company D, the 255th Infantry, was my 255th Infantry Regiment.
Okay. That's who you served through the rest of the war then?
Well, that's where I stayed until the next big thing was after the war was over. And then that's when I was transferred to the 70. Oh, don't do that.
That's all right.
Slipped my memory. 70. I think it was the 75th Division. It was a light. If you remember any of those emblems, it was the Lightning Division.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So you were assigned to a Company D machine gun unit, and your job was machine gunner, assistant, or?
Well, I was either on. I was on the crew, and then I was finally up to assistant gunner.
Okay.
I don't recall. I might have done a little stint as main gunner, but I think for the most part I was assistant gunner.
Okay.
On the machine guns.
Well, it sounds like you did experience combat. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Yeah, we were, once we got over up in France, there, northern France, we were on the line. And I can remember when we were going up, we were in a little town a little ways behind the lines, and they said, well, we're moving up tonight. You had to move, everything was at night. And there's forests around there. And they said, we're moving up tonight to take up our positions on the front, actually. And it said, now in the morning, you'll see the German lines. We're on the Rhine River, and the German emplacements are right across. You'll see people walking around over there. We don't shoot them unless we have orders, because it's cold wind. They're trying to get a little warmth from the sun. We like to do the same thing. If we shoot at them, of course they're going to fire back. So unless we have orders, don't fire. And that's the way it worked out. One time our line was a little bit further back, and between us and the dike was on the river, there was some foxholes. And some clowns came out from behind the rear, and I don't know why they did this. They got in those foxholes and took their rifles and started shooting at the Germans across the river.
Oh my.
Well, it was not long before there was a big crash of artillery came in. And I remember my section sergeant was on a latrine foxhole heeding a call of nature. And when that burst of artillery came in, he plopped right down into the hole.
Oh.
He was not a happy camper.
No.
but and there was a lot. I think there was quite a bit of the devil raised with those guys that did that thing, because again, you know, sometimes in the war you'll do things that make life as comfortable as possible, and doing that, abstaining from fire unless it was necessary, that was just one of them. It worked, but the Germans let us know.
Oh, yeah.
That hey, you broke the rule here, you know. Okay.
It's an interesting insight into
What?
the war. An interesting look at the war. That,
Yeah, well,
I mean, I can understand where you wouldn't want to be fighting all the time. So
that's right, sure. And we wouldn't have accomplished. You know, if you're just sniping at individual men, you're not really accomplishing very much. So why draw their fire?
Well, that was I guess, a memorable experience. Did you have? I'm sure you had many more. Are there any others you want to?
Well, you know, that's as they say, a good question. The trouble is with it, it's one of those kind of questions. When you start to concentrate, then you kind of lose the touch.
Oh. Okay.
Now, I'll tell you, one of the memorable incidents I had in the war was after we did hit the Siegfried line. We went up against, one outfit went up the day before, and they really got a terrible mauling. We saw them coming back, and our line was behind theirs, and they were in bad shape. And then they told us that night, well, now we're going to do it tomorrow. And we went in, I guess around daylight or something like that. Well, we had better luck. We got through the line. We got through the Siegfried line. Of course, the Siegfried line by this time was pretty well pounded, as was the Maginot line was pounded from the beginning of the war, and the Siegfried line got it, of course, when we came back up. And we got in there, but the thing that I wanted to mention was we were put in a field, and there was a gap in the Siegfried line itself where a roadway went through, and it had been cleared. And all those units, they were getting ready for the attack across the Rhine River. This was not up on the Rhine, this was back in the Saar Basin. But the units were moving up to across the Rhine, and it was one of the most powerful unit movements I've ever seen. Armor of every description, trucks loaded with troops, supply, everything. Tanks, of course, innumerable tanks, all going through, all heading up to the front, and the earth just sort of shaking. And I just looked at that, and it just does something to you. That was such a display of our power. And then there was the feeling, well, we had something to do with it, because we are the ones that cracked that opening. Not we individually, of course, but our units. They made that breakthrough, and then this released all that force, and they went all the way up to the Rhine, and they crossed the Rhine very shortly after that.
It does sound.
But that was one of my big experiences.
Seemed like it. Yeah. How about, did you receive any citation, recognition?
Yes, I was with we were at a place called the Stone Quarry, and we got into my platoon sergeant came over to me. He said, "Hey, Curtis," he said, "I want to talk to you." And he said he had an officer with him, and he told this officer, he said, "Now this man likes communications, so maybe you could use him." The captain said, I don't know whether he was a captain or if he was a captain. Oh, he said, "Yes, we'd be glad to have him." So they gave me this, if you know the SCR 300 radio, it was a kind of a big boxy thing. They gave me that, and I was to go with what they called the command party of this. I guess it was probably a company, an infantry company. And we were in some houses and stuff in there. And the forward observer from the artillery used that radio. I didn't do that. I just carried it. And I'd lay on the ground there under that thing, and he'd be using the microphone, you know, and calling in the fire and all that stuff. And that was the biggest piece of equipment. And of course, the equipment I worked with mainly in there was on the machine gun, and there I was just a crewman with handled the ammo.
Yeah. Okay. I know you said you wrote some things down. Is there any of those you'd like to mention?
Oh, I should have brought that along, I guess, but let me think. Well, I mentioned we crossed the Rhine, and yeah, I wish I had brought it along.
Oh, that's all right.
Okay.
That's a-
well, yes, maybe it'll come to my mind.
Sure.
So if you want to.
Got a few others, like, were you able to stay in touch with your family, like writing letters?
Oh yes, and I will say that I will say this for the Army. They said that next to food, letters had priority. They made every effort to get mail to and from us, and it was. I wasn't. The one time that we did have a bad time was when toward the end of the war, when things were really going our way. I mean, the Germans were practically running, and I got this. I believe they called me to the command. You know, if a guy didn't write to his family, and if they complained, he got a call to the command post, because the Army said, we want you to keep in touch with your family, especially with the married men. But I wasn't married then, but of course my mother was dependent on me. Because after all, those people there, they're sitting there back there worrying, and you owe it to them, if you can, to write. Well, apparently what had happened was I was writing all right. I wasn't even worried about it. I got this awful letter from my mama Cable, I guess. And she said, if you're wounded or you're in a hospital, get a hold of the Red Cross or somebody and let me know. So I went up to the CP and talked to the first sergeant. And I said, you know, I wanted, and he said, well, we'll get your communication through FOIA or something. I think they did something to kind of an emergency thing. And what had happened was the Army made this tremendous effort until the war ended, the actual fighting ended, which was around, I believe, in May.
Right.
And after that, they kind of let down on the deal. Well, that's when the letters all piled up, and so that the mail stopped coming. Well, of course, my mom didn't know this,
Right.
and that was a little kind of a bet. But otherwise, yes, they made a great effort to make sure that we got mail.
How was the food supply and all the other supplies? Did they come
Oh,
in?
you know, it was almost standard procedure to gripe about the food. I never found the food to be too bad. Once in a while, the field rations would kind of make you hope for better things, but maybe I'm easy to please. But I kind of like the thing. And the funny thing was, when I went up to the library, sent me up to Ohio State for from course or something, and so I ate up there in the dorm in the mess hall. And the students were griping about how terrible the food was. And I said, Lord, if this isn't just like the Army. And I thought the food, they have a farm up there, and I thought their food was delicious up at Ohio State. But these guys was griping about it. And I said, well, that just must be the thing to do. I don't know.
Right.
But no, basically I'd say the food was good. Of course, in the field we had these field rations and stuff like that. That would depend on the situation. But there was a very short time at all that I think there was maybe a day or two that I was almost without food. Of course, we had our emergency rations. We could eat those.
Were those the K rations or something?
Yeah, that's right, the K ration.
The chocolate?
But they had one, they called it, was it 10-in-1 or something like that? It was
yeah.
big cardboard box. And we were lucky. We had guys that, well, this was after the war. We had some prisoners of war. And they were, I guess, assigned to our outfit to work. And those guys would take those 10-in-1 rations. That's a 10-in-1. They'd take those things and they could do wonders with them. Our guys would just mix them up with water. These Germans would actually cook the food.
Wow.
So we rather
that sounds good.
lived well, yeah.
How'd you entertain yourself when you had time on your hands? Play cards or things like that?
Well, when we were in the trenches, in the foxholes, and by the way, we did have very good foxholes when we were up on the Blythe River, that's near Sargamon, Pattons, engineers had built them. And they were heavy railroad ties and banked dirt on there. So we were pretty neat in there. You sat there all day. You didn't go out during the day. You had to do any moving around. You did it at night. I think one of the things we did do a lot of was talk about back home, talk about entertainment, what we did on Saturday night, and sort of things like that. But, as I recall, time seemed to pass okay. I mean, I guess it's more, sometimes I think the Lord really takes good care of you, you know. You get help that you don't need now, like in civilian life, but you do get help that you do need when you're under those circumstances. And really it was just the passage of time, because we weren't always under attack. I mean, there was time we just said, but you could not get out and walk. I remember one time I went out and I had to heed a call of nature, and we had a kind of a ground rule that it was in the wintertime, there was snow on the ground. They said you had to go so many paces or so many feet away from your own hole before you did that. Well, I had gone the distance and that, and just as I was coming back, there was a loud bang down in the valley, and I felt something, I could just feel the wind hitting my ear. And this guy was sitting there, and the gunner he was in the hole. When I got down, he said, "Gee, that was meant for you." I said, "You're telling me?" And telling me, I guess I was an assistant gunner because I had a pistol instead of a carbine. I had my .45 and was crawling up over that wall, looking down into that valley. And if you're familiar with the .45, you couldn't hit that door from here hardly, with it actually. And here I'm up there aiming that thing down in that valley into those trees. But I remember that. That was one of the closest that I had. That was where, as he said, that was meant for you. We had some artillery barrages that were earth-shaking, and you'd feel the helmets swelling and all that jazz. But oh yeah. The worst part was when it was quiet at night and you knew something was going to happen and you're waiting for it. Once it starts, you kind of go. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but that was the psychology of it.
The training of it, you knew what to do, so you did it.
Yeah. Oh, well, now if I can interpose here,
sure.
Another thing about the night before the big drive was the drive that I guess went far toward ending the war. It was the 7th Army went on its offensive. I was on guard. It was dead quiet. Nothing was hardly moving. And the sergeant had loaned me his watch. He had an illuminated watch. And I was just looking at it. And I guess it was midnight, but it was an hour coming up. That sweep second hand went up and it hit the 12. And I'll tell you, if you'll pardon my French, all hell broke loose. Everything around that place exploded. I didn't even know there were other units that close to us. Artillery opened up. You could hear the shells going over from our side. And what it was that was the 7th Army. The whole army was launching its offensive in March. It was around the 15th of March, I think. But anyway, they were launching their offensive for their drive to the Rhine. And while we could hear the banging and crashing here, up from the front was just a steady, heavy rumble of thunder. So I could only imagine what the Germans were getting. Oh yeah, that was an experience.
Oh,
yes.
Sure. Yeah. Did you ever get any leave or rest camps or?
Well, yes. In fact, I got the nicest one I got was I got a week in Nancy, France.
Oh.
And that was when we were up on the Blaise River. And I know when I came back, I could sense everything was in motion. We had been on what they called the defense in the wintertime. We were going on the attack, and I got there just in time to join the unit when they were going on the attack up around Sarreguemines. Funny thing, though, about that leave, I wrote home, of course, and told my mom about it. And she said, you know, I kind of got scared when I first read that letter, your letter. She said, you kept talking about Nancy, and I was wondering if you'd run into some girl over there. No, I said that was the name of the city. It's a beautiful city, by the way.
Oh. Were you able to bring back any photos, or do you have a diary from that period? Or?
No, Mr. Ken, I don't. And I do have a debt of gratitude to you for this occasion, because this is really the first time, and I've been out, as you know, since 45, that really prodded me into action. And I'm going to try and write something up. The kids are on me to do that too. And I really do think, I don't want to be boasting at all, but I do think I have something to tell, because I did have the experiences, and I'd like to record them, and it'd be nice. Yeah. So but I haven't really. This is about the most ambitious thing I've done so far.
Yeah, I do remember your stories when we used to work together, so that's.
Oh yes. Well, and I like that when they get together, you know, and literally relive the good old days. Of course, I have come to really appreciate these new guys that are in now. For instance, I often thought when Vietnam was going on, I felt so sorry for those poor guys for this reason. One thing we knew when we went over there, the country was behind us.
Right.
We didn't have to worry about people marching down the streets in New York carrying Nazi swastikas and with Hitler's picture.
Right.
Everybody was for us. Those poor guys in Vietnam, they were in much worse conditions than we were, from what I've heard from the tropics. And you know now, you know as well as I do what went on in that time.
Right.
There was all this sympathy for the Viet Cong and all that stuff. And I know it was not the majority, and of course by any means, but it was just a noisy bunch of people. And that was a terrible thing for those guys, because going up there is hard enough as it is.
Right.
But man, if you don't think you got your people back, you know, you wonder what it's all about.
Right. Yeah. Can I change just a little and ask you, how did you feel about your fellow soldiers, like the enlisted you worked with or served with, or the officers?
That was one of the nice things I liked about the Army, and then it did for me. I was raised in, well, what you'd call a very quiet family. I was the only child in a farm out in Nebraska. And then I worked in under usually pleasant circumstances, like in the bank and places like that. The factory was, the first time I had a job, which I would say was a little bit on the, I'm talking about the atmosphere,
Right.
kind of a rugged side.
Right.
But I dreaded the Army, because I did read, especially in the factory, there were a bunch of people there that I wouldn't relate to too well. But I used to console myself, well, at least I don't have to go home with them. Then the thought came to me, well, you get in the Army, you're going to live with those people. I did. But I found there is a level of understanding that I didn't notice in civilian life. Even people that might disagree very much with me on, say, even manners of conversation and that. And in civilian life, they might make fun of my position or that and make it uncomfortable. That didn't happen in the Army.
Yeah.
The guys did their things, and they talked about their things, but if you didn't join in or didn't feel that you wanted to relate to that, nobody gave you a hard time.
Yeah.
And I think there was that comradeship, because we knew we had to live together, and we did.
Right.
The officers, I didn't have any particular trouble with those. I did have one officer that I kind of made a mistake of. I made a political statement. Well, we used to have, you used to have that ENR, education and recreation. Well, he made a comment about something in European politics involving the communists, and I rebutted it. And I'm not sure. He didn't like it. In fact, he even told me, he met me on the street, and he said, you know, the officers, I'm sure, liked what you said, but I don't agree with you. Well, so that was it. But within almost a week or two, did my orders come through for go to the port of embarkation. Now, I'm not sure that there was any connection, but how do I know? Those orders would be based on a quota.
Right.
The company would have to supply so many men. I have a feeling I was number one on the list. And maybe that wasn't too bad either. I mean, because after all, nothing really bad happened to me. But by and large, No, my officers were, there was a tough ones, especially some of the sergeants, but, and I feel, knowing myself, I think did pretty good because I'm kind of not too good on the rough and tumble, and I was not given a hard time. Hope I didn't give anybody else a hard time.
Right. Doesn't sound like it. Now, you know, you said the end of the war, you were with the 7th Army? In May?
No, there was a change there. I forget the exact circumstances it was, but I was transferred. Oh, the 63rd Division was sent home, but I didn't have enough points. They had a point system. You probably heard about that.
Right.
I had 45 points. So what they did, they sent the 45 pointers down to the 100th Infantry down at Stuttgart.
Oh, yes.
And then they brought guys with more than 45 points from all over Germany and put them in these divisions that were going home, of which 63rd was one. So when the 63rd went home, it probably didn't have hardly anybody of its original makeup in it. I went down to the 100th, and then they went, and that was a good break because they moved the 100th Infantry up to Berlin. And I was in the Berlin garrison for about 6 months. And I remember one place reading that when the Africa Corps, you've heard of them,
right?
They were, of course, Germany's crack unit in Africa, that Hitler promised that when they won the war, which of course they thought they were going to do, the Africa Corps would be the garrison in Berlin. That would be his tribute to them. And I thought to myself, well, they never got there, but I did.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a nice. The city was destroyed, but it was just the atmosphere. And I remember walking down. One of the ambitions of my life was, when I was a kid, I was always interested in foreign politics, and they always talked about the Wilhelmstrasse. Well, my middle name is William, this is Wilhelm, and I often thought, oh, I would like to walk down the Wilhelmstrasse. Well, I got to do it.
All right.
And I went on the S-Bahn, the elevated railway. We could ride free on there. And I met this fellow, and he said, well, could I come with you? And I said, well, I tell you what, you're welcome to. But I said, I know what I want to do. I want to get off, and I want to walk. There's a town up in the center of the city I want to walk in. Oh, I'll come with you. He said, oh, well, that's fine. So I got off up there, and I walked down the Wilhelmstrasse. Well, there wasn't as much space as there is between you and me here on the sidewalk to walk where the rubble was.
Right.
And we came around, though, a bend, and there was that big gateway. I'm sure you've seen it in pictures, the entrance to Hitler's chancellery. And I went in there, and the stuff I'd be interested in was all tore up. I like papers and document stuff. That had been just rubble, because, first of all, the Russians, this was in the Russian zone. So the Russians had been there. I guess the British were there. And I remember I went in that gate, this guy got nervous. He said, oh, look what's coming. 4 Russian soldiers with their rifles were coming toward us. And I thought, well, let's hope for the best. A couple of British soldiers came over. Evidently we were in the British zone, and the British soldiers came over, and then the Russians just quietly faded away. Yeah, but I prowled through that chancellery. It was getting dark, and we've got to get out of here because this was not in our zone. And I had to get to the elevator. And I got to the elevator and came home into the American section.
Did you meet any other allies? The French? I know you said the British. How about the Russians?
Well, yeah, we had I didn't soldier with any of them,
right.
But in Berlin we had an exchange system, mainly with the British, and I didn't get in on it, but some of our fellows would go over to the British zone and stay there, be barracked with them and eat and everything, live with them for a while, and they came over and did with us, and we had the British. And I remember one time I was talking to this guy, an Englishman, a little bit hard to understand. It's a Cockney.
Yeah.
And I got to talking like I do about what I did, you know. He was kind of quiet. And then he said, well, you know, he said this and that. And he said, you know, when I was at El Alamein. I said, you were at El Alamein? He said, yes. Lord, I said, I didn't say I salute you, but here I'd been spluttering along about my minor operations. And this guy had been in one of the great battles of World War II. And just quiet as when I was at El Alamein.
Right.
But I was glad to meet him. He was a very
yeah.
nice person.
Okay. So you finally got your points, did you?
Oh, yes, I got the points. And I finally got them. Trying to remember about coming home, how I guess, yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a fog there. I guess I came right from Berlin. Of course, now in Berlin, you know, we were surrounded by the Russians, by the way. And I remember I went on leave, and we were in a little, like a truck there, but it could haul passengers. And when we came through the Russian side, they opened those doors, and the guys stood with their rifles at the ready, and they kept one guy had the clipboard, and somebody told me, if you had one man short or one man over, they pulled that truck over into their field, and you might sit there for a month, and then they'd finally negotiate with the State Department to get you released. We went over to through the Russians, and the gate went up and let us through. One British soldier give us a high sign, went right on. But I'm telling you, when you went on the other way through there, and you saw those gates come down with those red flags and all that stuff, yeah, you felt you were on the inside of something.
No, yeah. So you went to an embarkation point to the States, or did you go through England or anything like that? Or?
No, I bypassed England. I would like to have gotten to England, and I saw it coming down through, I came home through Bremerhaven.
Mm-hmm.
That was the port where we the port of debarkation. We went out and went down the North Sea, and I was up on the deck, and I said, somebody said, that's England. Of course, by this time the lights and everything were on. The war was well over.
Yeah.
And then the next morning I got up and I looked at this beautiful green area with the white chalk cliffs. And I said, oh, that must be Ireland. But somebody on the crew, or somebody that knew the country, I guess, said, no, that's not Ireland, that's still England.
The White Cliffs of Dover.
But, yeah, it was that. We went down, and then we went down through there.
Then you arrived in New York?
Oh, the one thing I have to tell is kind of backtracking here a bit.
Sure.
But when we went across the Rhine River, we went in a barge. And again, the Rhine to me was, they always talked about the German, the Wacht am Rhein, and it was talked about a lot before the war.
Right.
And I often wanted to see that. I'd love to have seen that river. Well, they said, we're crossing the Rhine. We had to wait till dark. We went over. We were in an open truck. It was a cold night. But it said, well, we're going over the river, and they had these pontoons like that. You know, we went across those things.
Pontoon bridge.
So I stood up on the side, and that wind would just cut like a razor.
Mm.
But I stood up there till we crossed that river, and there were some searchlights kind of going on. I must have been looking for mines or something like that. But that was my crossing the Rhine. Everybody else stayed down. I was about the only one that stood up.
All right.
Yeah, that was a memorable.
And you came back, usually, was it to New York? Did you come?
Oh, yeah, we came back. Well, we came through, let's see. We went out through Camp Shanks. I forget the name of the camp. The one thing we came through rather quickly, and it seemed to me that the big thing was that you got a big dinner the first night you were home. And it was a good one. I don't know. Things kind of moved kind of fast. And then I was brought down to, again, I think I was brought down to Fort Bend to be actually processed out.
Okay. So once you were out, did you go back to work? Did you go to school?
Well, let's see. I had finished I guess I don't know whether I had finished a year of college or not. But of course now, saying when I just got out. Now I had the GI Bill,
Right.
and there was no problem. In fact, I went right to school. I went that summer. I got out around in April, and I went to school in the started in the summer. Because if you took a full courses or something, that counted for full time, and that meant I got not only the full allowance, but I also got the full family allowance for my mom. So, and then I finished my education from there on out.
Which school did you go to?
Xavier.
Finished at Xavier. All right. And after Xavier, did you start at the library, or?
Oh, I talked to the librarian at Xavier, and I was really wondering what I wanted to do. And he gave me some books on the library journal, something like that,
Right.
And I remember one of his, Mr. Worst, and he talked to me a little bit about library work. He said, there's just one piece of advice I'd give you. Whatever you do, don't take a job in a public library. Because he said, if you do, you'll never be anything but a glorified clerk. So what did I do?
Yep.
I don't regret it at all.
No.
No, this lady, I don't know, did you remember Miss Dunlap?
I remember the name. I don't really remember.
She
her
is the
name.
one who I talked to, and she was a very gracious lady. And she talked to me, and she said, well, now what I suggest you do, she said, I don't have any work for you now, but she said, you've got your degree, and she said, I would recommend, she said, you come back, she said, the only thing I could offer you, she said, is a page job. She said, I don't have anything else yet. Well, I said, how much does a page pay? She told me. I thought about it a minute. Well, wait a minute. I said, I get an allowance, I said, from the Army, from the government. She said, well, with what that'd pay me and what that page's salary will amount to, she said, my mother and myself, we can make it. I'd like that page job because I said, I'm not even too familiar with libraries, and I've never worked in one. Mm-hmm. And this would be, oh, she said, that'll be fine. She said, you report to Mr. Jacobs and start in the morning.
Wow.
And that was it. I guess it was Mr. Jacobs. Then, of course, eventually we had Mr. Epstein, and that was
right,
started another chapter.
Yeah. And I got a question here, like, what career did you follow? I know that.
What?
What career did you follow? But I know that.
Librarianship, yes.
Right.
And I'm glad I did.
Did you, in your job as, the librarian?
What?
In your job as librarian or in your life, how did your experience in the military affect you in the war, military and war?
Well, I think, I can't tell you what I actually did, like firing the guns and stuff like that, but I think it did give me an attitude of cooperating with others and sort of taking the ups and downs of life. Now that you asked me that,
okay.
I really think it did help.
Okay. Well, were you able to keep in touch with your buddies? I think you did tell me you went to reunions.
Well, yes, I went, and I was in touch with a couple of them. Well, of course, a very close friend of mine from Omaha, he went over, and well, another fellow too. We went to school there. Unfortunately, now both of them are gone or deceased because they're about my age. And the one regret I have about that, I thought I miss them. Of course, I didn't see them that often anyway, but there's a lot of things I'd like to share with them, and I have to suddenly, the thought, well, they're not here anymore.
Yeah.
But I did maintain some contact with guys in the Army. There's one fellow down in Ray Gibbons was the gunner. He's down in North Carolina, and we exchanged Christmas cards.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim, we're almost at the end, but do you have anything else you'd like to say? Anything you want to bring out?
Oh, I just can't think of anything. Is there anything you'd think of, Aida?
Just a real quick one. Remember the guy who had the big, was it the railroad lamp or something like that in the trailer?
Oh, I'm glad you reminded me of that one. He found this thing. It must have been from one of these, like these old style Western Railroad things. Great big thing with it had a lamp inside and glass panels. Oh, he was proud of that thing. Of course, he had this, the phrase was that he liberated it. Because liberate meant more than just opening the prison gates for PWs. Liberate meant also, I'll liberate that class. Anyway, he had this thing, and he had it in the trailer. And how was it that, well, there were two, no, there's another instance. This is one. He had it in the trailer. And then he covered the trailer with a tarp. So all of a sudden we got a hurry up call. We had to move out fast. And the machine gun was folded up. And this guy heaved that machine gun onto that trailer. And you heard the crash of glass.
Yeah.
That poor guy likened to die. And it wasn't because the gun got scratched either.
Well, Jim, we really appreciate you giving
Well,
us...
listen, I appreciate very much this opportunity to kind of refresh my own memory and really relive some of it.
And I hope you continue to write it down for your family.
Well, thank you. I think I'll do that. I will try to keep that resolution.
Okay.
Thank you very much.